Again, linguistic reduction is the way that we qualify matter, and to qualify matter, we must interface with matter through the algebra of atoms. Reality is conditioned matter, a self-configuring, self-processing language. Let me say that again. Reality is conditioned matter, a self-configuring, self-processing language whose spatio-temporal structure is holographically replicated everywhere within it as a self-transductive syntax. Shit, how's that gonna pay my phone bill? Well, see, your ancestors were inside talking about this, and he'll tell me, well, the white man came along when we was talking about this shit, took the land. No, they didn't take it that easily. Y'all gotta remember, it didn't come that easily. Whoever these beasts were that gave this bastard not the intelligence, but the science. See, he gave the science to a spiritual imbecile. And when you give high sciences to a spiritual imbecile, this is what you get. You see, you couldn't give this kind of technology to our people back then because we wouldn't use it. It wouldn't be necessary. We were walking on stars and we knew where the fuck everything was anyway. We didn't need your telescope. We didn't need your guns. But the planet was changing herself. Something had to die. What was in us as a people had to come out. Because every time you have a disease, the disease is intrinsic and you have to get it extrinsic, if there's such a word, before you are healed. So, if anything, this devil is our disease showing itself on the surface. And if we don't learn how to heal ourselves of this motherfucker, we ain't going nowhere but back into the primordial pool to come back as a slug, to try this shit all over again another couple of million years. I don't want to be there. Again, reality is conditioned matter, a self-configuring, self-processing language. It is a self-configuring, self-processing language whose spatio-temporal, in other words, temporal meaning everything, what we see in relationship to one another, spatio-temporal. So this is a fancy way of saying the relationship of bodies one to the other. Structures is holographically replicated everywhere. So reality is a seed that already exists within a quantum space. And as it grows into the space that is predestined for it to fill, it begins to condition the space that it's in. And all the people participating within that space understands the relativity of the space and then begins to create the conditions for quantumizing their own experience within that reality. Let's go back to the top now. Any questions?
The last statement you just made.
Yes.
How does that fit into sort of like diseases like Parkinson's and so on?
Good question. As we begin to become more and more aware of ourselves, we begin to see that genetically we have passed on from generation to generation the principle of lack within the context and construct of our language, and how we have translated that lack into a reality from perception. In other words, you can condition a child to think that it is not something, and therefore take on aberrant behaviorisms contrary to the universal mandate. That child now, based upon its actions and the thoughts that emanate from those actions, begins to set a course of activity that matches the lack. that causes it to think a certain way and thus cause atoms to be formed a specific way. Remember, the DNA helix, as they say it is, which we don't, we know this is what they have it, this is the way they have focused it, creates proteins. Those proteins are created based upon how we in our experiences, because the DNA is nothing more than a qualifying template. It gives you a basic structure, but you, based on experience, have the ability to change the programming within the DNA by your experiences. The energy called hate, anger, stress causes you to stretch the energy longer. It doesn't exist properly within the context of a whole hologram. So it has a very distorted energy pattern. Hate has a very elongated pattern. On the DNA helix, it doesn't touch all the places along the DNA where they create, where all of the, what is the proteins called? Yeah, what are the things that create the proteins? Aminos, amino acids and so forth. These amino acids are nothing more than triggers for the learning and the conditioning of the DNA. How you channel it through the DNA and what emotions are attached. If the emotions are from the higher universal love, they're more tighter and they're more powerful. If they're not, they're long and they're very disparate and they may jag here and go here and jag there. They're not in synchronicity with the dynamic energy that is the cosmic energy. Then, if you have it not touching certain points on the DNA, that now becomes the static conditioning that the child begins to, what is that word I'm looking for? When you fix something. So that's what has come. In other words, from repetition, this is what it becomes and it knows nothing else. Programmed, it becomes, No. I'm talking about the solidity. Yeah, it's become solid. In other words, the learning now conditions how the DNA will behave, and then 2 or 3 lives past that conditioning, you begin to see diseases come up inside of the soul structure, because the soul structure carries the template signatures of that experience, which then gives instructions to the new body through its genetic coding. So the soul's signature has instructions that begin to teach the genetics how to form around the tasks that the soul has set for itself for its next life. So the signature of Parkinson's is based upon a trauma that caused the energy frequencies of thought and emotion and the catalog of what you put into that chemical catalog. Because remember, all memory, all thought is a chemical memory. All memory is chemical. If the chemistries are consistently around that traumatic programming, then you begin to carry the scar and the signature of that experience, and it dictates to the genetics how you're going to be. If now, through the genetics that they've been teaching you, they're telling you, well, we have new ways to put new genetics in the place of the old genetics and then heal you of your disease. The genetics are the teaching mechanisms for the soul's way to output that experience, to help to organically release it and thus teach the soul what not to do. When someone is born crippled, they're born with a limitation. But the limitation is for them to do more thinking about what that limitation means. If you take the genetic that is directly encoded to the signature of experience on the soul and remove it from the body and affect that genetic coding, then you have stopped that disease programming on the soul, and now that body only acts as